Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer. And today we are going to just briefly talk about the ongoing mistreatment, um, losses of life of African workers, particularly in the Middle East, especially domestic workers. This is an issue that is ongoing. It is something that uh, have written about in terms of the legal context, which brings into the use of a system called the kefala system, where employers in some Middle Eastern countries keep the documents and passports of the workers who travel from the various countries. They tend to travel from East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Asia, Philippines, India, Bangladesh, many others. And it is widely believed, according to many experts, such as the migration groups, United Nations, human rights organization, that once the passports and documents of the people arriving from other countries for the employer are retained by their supposed bosses, that sort of creates a spiral of oppressive conduct, which sometimes can escalate into physical assault or worse, in losses of life. So that's the general background. As you know, I think last year, Ugandans, Kenyans, Ethiopians had to mobilize, citizens had to mobilize and evacuate hundreds of their fellow citizens who were living in dangerous, dangerous situations in the countries they were in, and others were being mistreated, uh, living on the streets. Women were reporting torture, abuse, sometimes worse. And there was a campaign to evacuate them to their home countries after the respective governments were reportedly, allegedly, doing very little. Now, with that background, The Guardian has picked up on that story, however, focusing on just one country, Kenya. And it says that urgent action is needed to protect quote unquote dying Kenyan domestic workers in the Gulf, according to rights groups. The It goes into cite specific individuals and mention that rights groups have expressed concern that not enough has been done to address the alleged mistreatment of domestic workers in Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia after the Kenyan government moved to secure work opportunities abroad for its citizens. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with people traveling to work, and the respective governments. I don't. It's not. We're not singling out one government. This is cuts across the board, whether it's Africa or Asia. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's the I think the rights group are saying it's the matter of the mistreatment and worse that is meted out to the domestic workers once they meet their employers, um, that leads to spiraling events. So they go on to say that it's a matter of great public interest, according to a lawyer at Chituo cha Sheria, a legal aid organization. He goes on to say that many of the Kenyan citizens have been abused and are losing their lives there, and calling for urgent protection. Now, whilst there's no recent publicly available data on the workers, the uh, official reports indicate at least 89 Kenyans, most of whom were domestic workers, lost their lives in Saudi Arabia between 2020 and 2021. The rights group Kituo cha Sheria and other rights groups Haki Jamii are supporting litigation against the Kenyan government by nearly a dozen former domestic workers who previously worked in Gulf states and who claim that the government failed to take proper measures to protect them from modern-day slavery and human trafficking, as far as the characterization is concerned. And a case that was filed in early February where the workers claimed that there was neglect to investigate any cases of abuse or losses of life, and a response has yet to be filed by authorities. Now, obviously, Saudi Arabia is an important ally of various countries, including African countries, and remittances that are sent back to the relatives, to their home countries, and according to the respective country, in particular Kenya, around 237 million was sent back last year. However, according to public records, they're saying that going abroad is necessary due to the high rates of unemployment and the need for job creation locally and internationally, which is a key government, the newly elected government agenda. There are also plans to sign various bilateral agreements announced last month, and the push to enable more workers to find opportunities abroad in Europe, North America, and the Middle East. It is reported that most of the agreements will be with Germany, which has a strong labor law record. But I think it's Saudi Arabia's inclusion on the list that alarmed rights groups, which fear that the hiring reports from domestic workers in the Gulf country have not been adequately addressed. Now, in the lawsuit, the organization called for immediate suspension of all labor migration to the Middle East until the state meets some basic minimums, according to its lawsuit. It has also demanded damages for the victims of their families. Now, they cite a case of someone called Purity Mbogo, age 33, who is one of the workers behind the case, and claims that in 2020 she was job hunting and heard about a teaching role in Qatar, but later realized to her horror that the recruitment agency had put her up for a housekeeping role in Saudi Arabia instead. In her written testimony to the court sent by The Guardian, Mbogo claims her phone and passport were confiscated upon arrival, leaving her unable to communicate with her family for months. She says she was hit with a hot iron when she complained about the seizure of her phone, and eventually she found her way back to Kenya in late 2020 after the family helped her get out of Saudi Arabia. And she's quoted as saying that she will never return to that country, according to The Guardian. There's a number of other women involved in the case who say they faced father abuse, sexual abuse, and one claims that she had a child as a result of the rape by her Saudi Arabian employer. The petitions claim that the Kenyan embassy in Saudi Arabia, quote-unquote, shut its doors to stranded workers when they reported they applied to consulate representatives, forcing them, and I'm reading verbatim, according to them, forcing them to be detained at deportation centers and agency accommodation facilities where life was demeaning for a human being, quote unquote. These are their reports in The Guardian, which we are reporting verbatim. It goes on to say that in March, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection carried out an inquiry into hundreds of recruitment agencies and barred 26 rogue agencies from sending workers abroad, according to local media reports. It's also reported that officials from the Labor Ministry traveled to Saudi Arabia in January on a fact-finding mission, and whilst there, they met representatives from the Philippine embassy to discuss experiences and quote best practices of labor export to Saudi Arabia. The campaigners sing out the kafala system, which I mentioned earlier before, which is used in many Gulf countries and gives employers enormous control, huge control over the workers' employment status and their stay in the country. And they need to get the employer's consent to end their employment, transfer jobs, or exit the country, which leaves those facing abuse vulnerable to exploitation. And those who end up in the hidden economy, the Kenyan Foreign Minister said, fall prey to brokers who traffic them to work in other households illegally. Now, the Foreign Ministry has said that some measures to help and protect foreign workers were not known or were underutilized to the to the holding centers, which provide accommodation for female domestic workers in distress. And also, according to the Diaspora Office, the centers have taken in roughly 8,000 women over the past 2 years, offering legal aid for employment disputes, providing food and psychological care, and assisting them to procure visas and flights home. However, it is reported some of the workers have also been accused of acting um, inappropriately against the workers and detaining them in squalid conditions for months. So that's sort of in a nutshell, but like I said, this is not a new story, it's an ongoing issue. In this case, it's focusing on one country, but this casts a wider net in countries like for folks from Ethiopia, Eritrea, for example, in Lebanon, in Oman, Bahrain, and other countries in the Middle East. And we have written about it, where treatment of Middle East workers in the Middle East. There's an episode over that regarding that specific issue in terms of legal context that is down below, where you can go and look at the law. And so there we are. There we should leave it on this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer. We shall speak again. Thank you and thanks for listening. Bye.